Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing just fine. I hope nobody needs to operate on me. So no one has to shrink and go inside my body.
That's right, yes. Yes. The future of technology, this is, eh? This is how we're going to do. Moving on from keyhole surgery down to clearly very expensive miniaturization surgery. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about 1966's Fantastic Voyage, in which a small crew of people are miniaturized in a submarine and sent inside a Russian, I think it's a Russian defector's body in order to stop a blood clot on the brain so that he can communicate secrets to the military. Whilst they are shrank, they go through a series of trials inside the body, dealing with everything from the turbulence of the beating heart to the sound of an eardrum. But overall, they succeed. So, initial thoughts, Julian. What were your initial thoughts on this film?
Yeah, I mean, here we are in the 6th episode already of this season, and you know, I have to say I'm glad to see this movie all the way through. I have not previously sat there and really watched it from start to finish. And obviously, this is a pop cultural touchstone. You know, Fantastic Voyage is referenced constantly. There's some version of this in Archer and, you know, tons of different shows. And having said all that, it is shocking to me how much I do not enjoy it and don't think any of it really makes sense.
Interesting. No, I'll be interested. It's interesting. I was interested. You say about how influential this is. Like you said, this has been mimicked and replicated any number of times. I think, like, I'm sure there's an episode of The Simpsons that does this, and you said like Archer. This film even has, as a, you know, you could even say that this film has a weird sequel in Inner Space, the 1980s film with Dennis Quaid and Martin Short. Because in this film, they actually use the line, the strangeness of inner space, which I was like, oh wow. This is also in Airplane. They joke about this when the guy sort of says about what a time to run out of sugar, and obviously sort of they have the character saying like what a time to run out of cigarettes, and it escalates until he's basically sort of sniffing glue. So
yeah, that is clearly a reference to this.
Yeah.
That is, and it's very spot on. In Airplane, I always remember like, well, I chose the wrong week to give up snorting cocaine, or cough syrup or whatever.
So yeah, you can see the sort of like the pop culture references throughout this, like repeatedly. However, as you said, does it work? It's a very inoffensive film, is how I would describe it. I would also say this is probably Raquel Welch's least of anything. Like, she doesn't seem to do much of anything in this film. Like, I think she has like 4 lines as Cora. But yeah, I mean, it's the film. The one thing I was surprised about, having gone back, I watched this as a kid. Like, it's one of those films I'm sure was on like Sunday afternoon television, you know, when I was a kid. And so I know I've seen this, but going back and watching it, I was like, oh, this isn't like a Disney kind of film. Like it's sort of it's not played like a family film.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's quite straight laced. It's quite a straightforward sort of I don't know, science adventure, I suppose, or sort of like it's got like a ticking clock and all that sort of thing. But yeah, it's not played as I thought it was. I remembered it slightly differently, I think. So I mean, having like the professor attacked at the beginning to sort of kick off the plot and stuff, and then having sort of like, you know, the below ground laboratory and all this other stuff, I was like, oh wow, this is actually kind of going for something a bit different, you know.
Well, that's true. I mean, having said that, I felt I could not escape the Disney feeling. You know, you're right. It's sort of framed in that way, and I want to talk about how it's framed and what's going on in this universe. But watching it, I felt tonally the thing that this is closest to is the black hole, the Disney attempt a decade and a half later to do science fiction. And, you know, you said it's inoffensive. You know, I feel like inoffensive usually offends me. You know, stuff that's just like pablum for the masses, toned down so that it's not going to rattle anyone's cage. That rattles my cage. I'd much rather stuff, you know, be itself, swing for the fences, offend people if need be, than, you know, sort of have this kind of tone. And it's not that I'm against family stuff or kids stuff or whatever, but it's not really interesting. I mean, it is shocking to me how little drama. You said there's a ticking clock. There is no drama in this entire movie. I mean, let's be crystal clear. There is no scene where you're like, how are they going to survive this? You know, it's like time and time again. Oh, look, some strings are menacing a character. You're like, it's a shit.
Yeah, there's no tension in this movie. You're right. For something that's supposed to be, you know, they introduce a literal ticking clock of 60 minutes, and it comes down to the last four. And even the last four, they are some of the characters are incredibly calm about doing what they've got to do. They're like, you know, we've got 6 minutes left. It'll take us 2 minutes to get to the exit point. Well, that gives me 4 minutes to do this surgery. You're like, oh, that still sounds. I'm sort of on Donald Pleasance's side at this point, where I'm like, no, like you've blown it. Like, go. So yeah, it's just the thing I would say is you say about how, you know, Disneyfication, whatever, and this was 20th Century Fox at the time. This did result in a cartoon series that ran from 68 to 77. And yeah, 17.
We'll ever talk about that on the show.
No, we won't. I can guarantee it.
I would like to see it, like, just for 2 minutes to realize how unbelievably horrible it is and suppress the vomit in my mouth in order to never look at it again.
But yeah, no, you are. When I say inoffensive, I know exactly what you mean. Is that thing of like lack of tension? I mean, it looks good. I think the film looks good. I'm fine with all that, but it's kind of I never feel like no one's going to make it home. You know what I mean? Like, at no point do I feel like this is going to fail. I'm just like, oh yeah, well, like, you're going to take. They constantly have to move from one system to the next. Like they're in the circulatory system, then in the lymphatic system, then they're in something else. They keep moving through these things. I'm like, what damage are they doing to this poor person inside? But like,
you're told they're very small, right? So like they could just zap through. Yeah, it's like that's a pinprick kind of. But it doesn't really make sense. But yeah,
no, but still, like you say, they keep doing it, and then they just pull it out of the map, and they're like, oh, we could just go this way, and all right, and everyone agrees, and they just move on. Like,
God, yeah. I mean, you made me think about the map, like. I mean, there's so in the control room they have these maps of the human body, and there's a giant one on the wall.
I love the giant
sort of
one.
Like moving parts
as a magnetic dot to show where they are. I
and they're sort of moving it as if it's a war room, you know, and you know, of course, you know, it's like even with GPS, you know, like clearly the people I mean, this is incompetently written from start to finish, but the writers have envisioned this as like radar. Not thinking radar can't be shrunk down with the same degree of accuracy. Even with GPS, it's like, close enough, 3 feet. Like 3 feet is like, well, it could be in his toe, could be in his crotch.
Yeah.
We don't know.
They're in the top half of his body the entire time. Oh, well, at least that's good.
Pretty much.
What I would say is, as well, you have to sort of accept, before we move on, we have to accept the shrinking capability is a bit of a give, right? However, so I want to sort of lay this out because it's something I thought was interesting. So they have like a stage, they go through phases. So they shrink down they all go in the ship, and then they shrink down the ship, and that gets smaller. And then they place this teeny ship into this massive like test tube. And I was like, oh, that's weird. So they place that inside this massive test tube. Then they shrink the test tube down. And then that becomes a syringe. And they put the syringe together. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then they're going to inject that into the person who's been injured, this professor. So I was like, okay, well, they've actually thought this through a little bit. Like, you have to get them into a syringe. So you've got to go in phases and stuff. So I was like, okay, you've given that some consideration of how you would want to present that. However, there is then a conversation about the fuel for the ship, for this submarine, and it says it's a minuscule, like a microscopic thing of radiation of nuclear thing. Well, I can't remember what it says. And your main character, you're sort of like your rough, ready, sort of like rogue kind of guy who's the main character. Grant, his name is, played by Stephen Boyd. Grant asks the question of one of the other guys and says, of Bill Owens, who's the other captain who sort of like flies the ship or guides the ship. He says, oh, what do you mean? This is, well, nuclear energy can't be shrank. So by the time we're down to this size, it'll be big enough to power the ship. And I'm going like, but that's not how it works.
Right. Nuclear atoms, like radioactive atoms. Well, there's a lot that's radioactive, actually, to one degree or another. Yeah. Granite is fucking radioactive. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. That whole sequence with them shrinking, and then they have these like dumb little forklifts come out, and and they've got like I love the guy who's just standing there going like, looking very, very serious as he's gesturing.
There's a guy, so just so you know, for listeners, but there's a guy who has a white glove who's literally like, when you stand behind a friend's car and you guide them backwards and you're like, oh, that's fair enough. That is literally what he's doing for the precision of having these things inserted into this microscopic it's hilarious to watch. It was brilliant.
But actually, that whole sequence is probably my favorite sequence of the film.
Oh, yeah.
Because it has a certain amount of thoughtfulness. Now, it really doesn't make sense, right? Because just shrink them down all the way, or put them in a thimble and then throw them in the top of the syringe, right? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. You don't need all of that. But, I mean, I'm reminded of a couple examples of sort of how to understand narrative. One is like the making things a bigger deal. Thinking of like the raising of the obelisk in the Ten Commandments, where it's not a big deal, but you have characters going, all right, pull, and it's turned into this big event. This is a dumb thing, right? In the same way, watching that guy indicate is like making it feel much more grandiose than it really needs to be.
Yes.
But ultimately, all of this and all of this film, I think it's the best example I can think of this thing in writing where you add complications, right? So like you look at like the script to like Basic Instinct. It's done halfway through, right? You're like, all right, I've got a script. It is 60 pages long. Like we know who's the killer. I've got to somehow get it to 120 pages. I'm going to introduce another suspect, and and then go off on that for 50 pages. So you have these ways that writers just kind of introduce a complication for a complication's sake, and hopefully it will be interwoven into the plot, so it doesn't feel like, oh, you could just pull it out and the movie would be the same. This movie is nothing but complications.
No.
Like, they have clearly said, here's the plot. You're shrinking and you're going into somebody's body.
Yeah.
Literally, that example of the maneuvers to shrink them down, that is to add to the runtime and add complications.
Mm-hmm.
Every single thing that happens to them inside the body is one needless complication after another. And that's why there's no engagement. It's not drama.
Well, what I would say is, because you can do that and do it relatively well. Relatively well, I would say about that. Because a Bond film is just that, isn't it? Like a Bond film, in many cases, can be just sort of like, it's almost like a segue of mini adventures. Like, okay, he's going to go here and do this thing, and then then he finds another clue, and he's got to go somewhere else. Like, if it's done in a certain way, you can do that thing. Or you could just pull one out and go, okay, we'll just stick those two together. And I talked about the sort of the obviously the influence this has had on other things, and I thought about like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is very much the same. But one of the things that does to create drama is, because this feels incredibly safe. Like, this is one of the safest films I've seen. But with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, like, it throws them into the garden, and that's the first complication. And they come across other things, but like, you're like, oh no, you're into the wild. You have no control over this, and you haven't been shrunk. There's no army or medical fleet of medical sort of people stood behind you sort of to back you up. But you're right, in this, like, I never feel like, because it's like they have all these complications and they solve them all in such quick succession with a discussion that you're just like, oh, all right, well, when the next thing happens, I'm pretty sure you'll solve it, because there doesn't seem to be, like the heart is a really good example, right? It's the best example of what you're saying. They get pulled out of, they get injected into the circulatory system, and they're going through one bit, and there's like a whirlpool, and so they have to cut from being in an artery into a vein.
Right. It just takes them there,
yeah.
And then they're no longer on course.
No, so they're now heading towards the heart, and they've been saying, like, we can't go to the heart. The heart will just, the turbulence of the sort of the pulse, the beating of the heart will destroy the ship, and so you must be like, oh my god, and it literally cuts to the outside, and they're like, well, you can stop his heart for a minute, and it takes them 57 seconds to get through, so that gives them 3 seconds to spare, and that 3 seconds is supposed to create some sort of tension.
Mm-hmm.
However, they get through the heart in 57 seconds, and they revive the guy. Move on, and it's just like, oh, okay. Like that.
Yeah,
It's the repeat of that. Like, they just keep succeeding.
That's okay. I mean, there is a kind of tension there. I mean, as they're going through, and it's kind of like, oh, this is spooky. Like, are they good? But yeah, it doesn't feel tense. It doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, the same thing, like, again and again, they have to go outside and make repairs, right?
Mm.
There's that ludicrous bit where they're in the ear and they have to make repairs, and, they're like, don't drop anything in the room, or it'll shake nobody thinks of getting out of the room, I mean,
that was my point. They're heading to the inner ear. Can everybody leave?
Yeah, right.
Let's not have 30 people stood in a room.
Yeah, I mean, it's very bizarre. And, but it's like that. The reason is because basically there's this seaweed stuff that is, caught up in the vents of the craft, right? So they all have to get out and just pull it off. Well, that's a needless complication. You don't need that. There is a certain amount of tension as you see them get on their spacesuits, and, I mean, it's really an EVA, right? I mean, they're, okay. But it just doesn't, there's never any, you don't feel any tension. It's not that they succeed, right? Because they would succeed in most movies, right? I mean, in Armageddon, it's the same thing. There's a bunch of things that have to happen. There's a bunch of, we're off. I mean, Apollo 13 is the same thing.
But people die in those films.
There.
Yeah, people die in those films. Like, things happen and you lose people. I mean, Armageddon is one of those things. We will cover Armageddon at some point, because it's one of those ridiculous films where, like, it is ridiculous. Like, it's one of the best examples of ludicrous blockbuster cinema. However, it does things like, it does kill off certain characters when you're like, oh, right, Christ, okay, well, they're going to do that. Fair enough. This one, This film, at one point I was watching it and I was in my head I was debating, does this have too many people involved or too few people involved? Like, there's not enough people for me to have like some red shirts kind of situation like in Star Trek. Like, you want to be someone to be killed off. But then there's a five people on the ship. I'm like, yeah, but they haven't given everyone enough dialogue for me to care about any of the people. So
right, and basically they have no personalities.
No.
I mean, they have a one-line personality, and their backstory is like, right, I'm the assistant. Okay, that's all we need to know. Right?
Yeah, but you've literally hired Raquel Welch in 1966 to be the assistant. And then basically hide her in the background for most of the film.
Yeah, she's
bizarre.
No, I mean it is very strange, and I know exactly what you mean about sort of like I hate the dumb characterization of disaster movies and Armageddon, where it's like ever since we lost his mom, I've had to be a father to him. And, I hope he gets to grow up with a father. I didn't get that, but this mission comes first. Well, guess who's going to die? I mean, and it's terrible, terrible. That stuff is almost always just terrible, terrible. But then here we have a vision of what happens when you just don't bother doing any of that at all.
Well, let's drill into a couple of things, because there's several things that I want to highlight. Let's go through some of the characters. So you've mentioned Raquel Welch as Cora, the assistant, and she's meant to be like the best assistant, nursing assistant that you could, that he totally trusts her. Brilliant. Doesn't do anything. Like, she doesn't seem to become a love interest. She's not her being there. Other than that, there's a scene at the beginning where one of the generals is like, I won't have a woman on this mission. It's not for women. And she's like, tough. I do whatever. She's on it. Like, at no point does her being a woman on this mission matter in the slightest. Her having to prove herself or anything else never comes up. It doesn't matter. So she's sort of like, all right, that's her. You have Grant, who's the first person you've introduced, who's like the good-looking one. Let's say he's your rogue, he's your Han Solo kind of character. He's not, because he's not roguish. He literally does everything he's told. But he's supposed to be sort of like books. Yeah, exactly, yeah. But he's your good-looking sort of like main character sort of thing on the ship, and so he has a few moments. But he's supposed to be the brave one. But all he is he's a diver and a communications expert, and that's about it. So like he doesn't. There's nothing there that says again like he was a diver during the war or some stuff, and you go, okay, well, what war? Because he's clearly not older than 33. So there's bits like that, and then you have the captain who guides the ship, Captain Bill Owens. Doesn't seem to do a great deal other than fly the ship. Like, he just sits up in the cockpit the entire time, and you're just like, okay, fine, that's that. So it comes down to two people in the ship.
What you haven't mentioned yet is that it's established from before they shrink that there is a traitor. Like, we are basically they are fully aware that, like, the Soviets. I mean, the Soviets and the Americans. Occurs during the Cold War, and there is a traitor. They can't guarantee that there's not a traitor, and it becomes very clear that there's a traitor on board. Right? So this is kind of the big mystery.
It's not a mystery, is it? Though?
No,
but
there are five people. I mean, it's like I'm always reminded of Throw Mama from the Train, where they review the script and say, it's a murder mystery. You have three characters, and one of them's dead on page 2.
Yeah. But that's the thing, because you then end up with the Doctor, who I'm trying to find, played by Dr. Duvall, Arthur Kennedy, and then you have Dr. Michaels, played by Donald Pleasance. Now, I like Donald Pleasance, a bit of national treasure, Great Escape, Halloween, Blofeld in Bond. He's done all those kind of things. However, when they line up and they actually have this thing about who the traitor is. Now, I'm not entirely sure that he is. Is he like a communist sympathizer? Is that the point of the treachery? Because it never feels like that later on in the film. So basically, you've had these two characters, and it's Dr. Duval that's sort of called into question. He's like, well, I've never met a more dedicated medical professional in my life. And you go, okay, well, it's clearly you.
Yeah.
That's the traitor. Like, that's clearly who this is going to be. And so, yeah, throughout the film, I'm just looking at Donald Pleasance and saying, like, this Weasley character that you're playing, oh, you are clearly the one that's doing all this. Like, it's not. You say it's a mystery. That may have been the purpose, but like,
well,
yeah,
that is a classic example of, if you're sitting there and you say, all right, I have the script assignment. What are we going to do to complicate this, right? Well, they can't just be injected next to the brain and laser this problem. They're going to be injected, and somehow they've got to go off course. And then, all right, we're going to go through the heart. Well, what's one of the first complications you think of is there's a traitor on board the ship. Right? That's such a classic kind of complication. But again, even that does not create narrative tension. Even that is like, right, I mean, it's pretty clear who it is, but also I don't care.
It never means. Well, also, if you wanted to eliminate who the traitor is, Grant is brought in, and he's the one that's told there's potential for a traitor, so watch out. So it's not him, because he was brought into this mission. Like, he knew nothing about it beforehand. Cora is brought into the mission, because she was never actually intended to be on it, so it's clearly never going to be her. And then so you have either one of the doctors or the pilot of the ship. And you go, all right, so it's down to 3 people, but you've clearly established it's one of the doctors.
Well, the other thing is they show these characters clearly reacting and doing things in a way. Like, you see characters finding the sabotage laser, right? The laser that's going to be used on the, on the brain lesion or whatever, has been sabotaged at one point. Mm-hmm. And you see characters who discovered it. You have characters who, clearly are well-intentioned, characters. Clearly, you would eliminate them immediately. Right there, who's got to have done it, right? You're down to a couple suspects. But, speaking of lack of narrative tension, this should be a big issue, right? Yet, there are scenes where, there is never a fight about, like, maybe you're the traitor, right? Which we've seen in these movies, right? Even that Horizon, what is it? That's so terrible with the haunted house in space.
Event Horizon.
Event Horizon. Yeah, even Event Horizon, as terrible as it is, knows, like, make the characters argue, right?
Yes.
Like, I disagree. Are you a traitor? That is such an easy way to generate tension. At no point do any of the characters argue about that. And instead, there are scenes where they go outside. And it's like, if you're sending me outside, if I'm part of, like, 4 out of 5 people going outside, the first thing I'm going to say is, like, look, we know there's a traitor on board. Everybody's got to go outside. Who are we covering? That kind of thing. Nobody even mentions that. It's just like, look, we all know there's a traitor, but we are good Americans, and we will operate as if nobody is a traitor until they murder us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's the thing. Like I say, it's a weird, like, Chekhov's gun that someone sort of, like, left on the side, isn't it? They sort of introduce it. Go, I'm just going to leave this on the side. We may or may not come back to this, but I'm going to remind you it's there repeatedly by pointing at it, and then at the end it may come up. It's so bizarre. And even when it does come up at the end, let's talk. But let's just talk about this point first. So Donald Pleasance is revealed to be the traitor. Okay, that is the end of the film. So at the end of the film, he tries to stop. Yeah, spoilers for a almost a 55-year-old film,
a 55-year-old movie that everybody can guess this answer anyway, right?
But when he's revealed to be the traitor, so again, I'm never entirely sure of his motivation. So when you have a traitor, like, it's usually for ideological or personal purposes or whatever. There's a reason for it. when the ship first closes and gets injected stuff, he has like a panic attack, like he has claustrophobia, and he has a pretty good story. Like, I was trapped under rubble during the Blitz for 2 days, and you're like, oh well, that makes kind of sense. So I'm it's a kind of good backstory. I understand that. But when it comes to the end, and they're all going to sort of like stop, they're basically going to explode out of this poor person's body if they stop sort of like stop shrinking. They're going to reform into their normal sizes. So he keeps he stops, breaks the laser, he untangles something so the air pressure can go low, and then at the end he keeps stopping them and keeps saying, "Oh, we should restop. We should go back. We should go back." I don't know what his motivation is, because what he should, because is he just trying to keep the professor quiet? Is he actually a part of the Russian? Is he a Russian spy, like a Russian mole? In which case, should he not really be trying to kill the professor from the inside? And that the use of the laser at the end should then become the arguing point. Like, I don't know, because at the end, all he does is try to escape.
Yeah, I mean, well, he does hit the other guy over the head, right?
But only so he can escape, so they can try and get away. That it seems like another panic attack almost. Well, no, it's not. It's not. But I still don't know his motivation for.
Well, because he doesn't have one. I mean, and I want to back up a little to sort of like, how does this work? What is the world that we're in, right? Because a story doesn't begin. Hey, a guy had a heart attack. We're going to have to go in and fix his left ventricle. The coolest way of doing this, buddies, is by sending a ship in miniaturized. You've got to have some kind of justification. So you say it's not a family film in the sense that it starts with this weird sequence, which is sort of an attack on the guy who winds up having the ship go inside him. And it's brutal. I mean, it's, there's gunfire and people are killed. And none of this, you're not told who this person is. None of this has any context. It's just like a random action sequence. And then you're told very quickly, all right, so this guy has, first of all, Russia and America both have miniaturization technology. Okay.
Yeah, that is stated in this film. It is stated in the film. Yes.
Right. So, and clearly they know that this is a plot hole because they say, well, why don't the Russians have this? Oh, they do. But this scientist is the only one who knows how to make it, last, the effect last longer than 1 hour. Right. So we've got to repair his brain because he's been attacked by the Russians. I mean, so already this is preposterous. Right. I mean, so yes, that traitor is working for Russia, and yet he has so many other opportunities to sabotage the mission or kill people that he doesn't take. It's like they've forgotten that he's a traitor. It's not important. They totally have forgotten that there's a Cold War context here. I mean,
yes,
like that's cool. Like the mission of this, like they should be saying, like, America's security depends on this. We have 2 minutes to do this. It doesn't matter if this guy dies. What matters is whether my children and your children die in a nuclear cloud. Nobody ever says, it's like the movie has totally forgotten that, like, the piece of the world is at stake in the Cold War. Totally not important. That traitor, doesn't express, like, doesn't say the word, all right, comrade. He has no Soviet inclination. What's going on?
One of the things that it made me think about, especially with Donald Pleasance being in it, where you have 2 ticking clocks going on that drive the thing, is Escape from New York. So in Escape from New York, it's someone is injected into a situation to go and sort it out. So, but in that, it's obviously Snake Plissken has to go into New York to save the president, and a tape that he has that has some I don't know, some secrets, some nuclear secrets or something, because he has a presentation to the world that will ensure world peace. That's the point. But then you also have this second one that is where Snake is injected with these poison capsules. If he doesn't do this within so much time, he will die. Right? They will dissolve and it will be poison and he will die. So you have this sort of like secondary ticking clock. Well, the mission has a ticking clock because the president has to present by this other time, but then Snake's got a clock as well. He has to care about it. And that's almost like what this film should have had. Like this film should have had, like, you've got the timing for the submarine growing. Again, no one says, like, beyond this point, if this isn't done, basically this guy's head's going to erupt and a massive submarine is going to appear in the room.
Yes.
which
Which is spoilers, the ending of the 2-part Archer episode.
yes.
Which is quite charming, you know.
But yeah, that's clearly, like, going to be a joke. And I know, like, even the boys have done it recently with some things. But one of the things
not done with the blood clot, but
no, not going to talk about that in this podcast, not yet anyway. But so you have their 60 minutes that they've got to do things, but they should really be like, we need this secret in order to do something. Like there needs to be like a secondary where, like, we need the professor to come round and tell us this secret because, as you say, there is a world. The stakes on this are just so small. It's how it feels throughout. Do you know what I mean?
But
like,
they're not. I know exactly what you're saying, but again and again,
right,
they're not. But it feels as if there's no drama whatsoever. I mean, you're going through a guy's heart. There should be stakes, right? I mean, you all are, there's a traitor. You're all getting out of the ship but one dude, right? That happens multiple times. You would think that either, that clears somebody or it doesn't. You'd be scared to go out. Nobody has those conversations.
No.
Nobody has those conversations about the Cold War. I mean, the stakes are, essentially there's a new technology, a new sci-fi technology that both sides of the Cold War have. That should be, overhanging the entire plot. We have to have the advantage. There is no deterrent if we don't have the advantage, that sort of thing. So I'm going to jump forward to the very end because we're talking about this framework. So you say, like, there isn't the sense of, right, we're going to, complete the surgery and then he's going to come out and reveal this big secret. And I know what you're going to say. Plot. Yeah. Well, first of all, he doesn't come out, right? He's not revived. He just isn't going to die from this blood clot, right? So he's still in a coma. And then everybody's just like, all right, congratulations, and shake their hands. And the movie ends as if it's like 1930s movies where we've talked about, where it's like, all right, King Kong's dead. That's the end, fine. That's all you need. We've resolved the main plot. At no point do they say, right, well, congratulations. There's a Cold War context to this that is never brought back. And this is where I get to this idea of, like, complications. Everything exists to just drive this special effects plot. This very silly plot. There are no characters. There is no setting. There's no story. None of that matters. No, you're right. I thought exactly the same, and I knew you were going to say this about the ending, because they do. They they come back to their normal size, and everyone's hugging and sort of going, "Yeah, we've made it in one of the rooms." Nobody goes back into the other room and says his pulse is strong, he's survived, the likelihood of him coming out of this coma is now 100%. Well done, you've saved America, or you've given us a better chance. There's none of that, and I was waiting for it, and then the credits start. I tell you what, because I was watching this on my laptop. And so I had the sort of the time bar pops up every now and then when you move the mouse. And I spotted there were 4 minutes left at one point. And I was like, they're still inside. And there's 4 minutes left. Like, how are they going to resolve this? 4 minutes later, I'm like, oh, they're not going to resolve it. They're going to end it. Oh, fair enough. Like, that's what's going to happen. Well, you say resolve it, but that presumes there's a plot to be resolved, yes, right? I mean, that was not a plot. That was just an excuse to establish, okay, we've got this technology, go inside them. That's all that matters. One thing I want to mention, actually, we talk about character and plot, and we talk about, obviously this is a Cold War narrative, so you're talking sort of like, America versus the Soviet Union. So at one point in this film, I was curious about this, because obviously my understanding is, sort of within the Soviet Union, they're sort of like, we've eradicated religion, and it's all about sort of like, very sort of like, for the people and blah, 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 blah.
there's a moment in this when your Dr. Duval, who's the one who's originally sort of suggested, or potentially suggested as being the traitor, but he has a lot of sort of like religious talk. He gives this thing that they go past certain things, and he's talking about sort of like the decisions made by
God's
it's
design
intelligent
is
design
evident.
almost,
Yeah.
which made me roll my eyes. But
Yes.
they get into the brain, and again that he mentions, he quotes something, and someone Grant completes the quote, and it's obviously this thing about how special the mind is and all this other stuff. And Donald Pleasance's character actually has a really funny line. He says, "Oh, okay, that's fascinating. Let me know when we pass the soul, and I'll take a look," sort of thing.
Yes,
Like,
that's a good line.
and I was like, yeah, I like that line. But I was like, are we supposed to be taking this thing of sort of like, in the last episode we talked about Alphaville and this idea of emotion and instinct and stuff versus cold logic and intelligence. Okay, is this trying to present something similar? Are we now supposed to be sort of taking it, this idea of the passion and the creativity and the faith of the American versus the cold logic, the coldness of this sort of Soviet thing? I was like, cool, are we going to get a little bit of an argument about that? Nope. Like, it's a nice little moment, but again, it doesn't drive anything or push anything to be like a motivating factor to any character development at all.
Yeah, it just seems like, I mean, like all the dialogue in here, it just seems like it's just some dialogue.
Yeah.
It just, look, I mean, this is everything feels as if it's a complication to fill space, right?
Mhm.
I mean, and I quite agree. I like that dialogue quite a bit. And you're right. It does sort of illustrate the difference between, the two countries there. But that's not important. That's never going to come back. And in fact, in none of the sequence do they mention America or the Soviet Union. I mean, nobody says anything about that. So you're not invited to make that connection. I'm sure that connection is intended, but it's not going to be elaborated upon. It's not important. It's just a line. It's flavor text, right? It's just there to fill.
And that's the thing, like I say, when I come back to this idea of it being inoffensive, it's exactly that, isn't it? Like, we have joked, and I know that you have certain feelings about blockbuster cinema and that sort of thing. Like the Fast and the Furious, is actually a very good example of it. Some of the later Fast and the Furious, one of those things where the escalating ludicrousness of the plot of the stunts and sequences that have to take place is the purpose. That's the point. The plot is, the MacGuffin that's being chased is literally that. It's a MacGuffin to facilitate this escalation of events, car chases, helicopter chase, tank chase, whatever the hell it's going to be, is the point, not the plot. And so, to me, watching this from '66, I was thinking about that and thinking, this feels like a poorly done blockbuster from a later decade.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I do think that some of those blockbusters that I would object to today have more inconsistency scene by scene. Where this feels like it's from an earlier period in which, there's no narrative tension. Yes, the basic idea of the story makes no sense. There's no attempt to connect the beginning with the end and really, or have anything to say. I mean, it feels like a college writing chore that somebody would give you, to write this movie. I mean, it feels like this was a chore to write, and nobody really cared. Having said that, I know exactly what you mean, and I think that's correct. I do think that, like, here it's just for the spectacle, right? But even then, I mean, it's, I don't know. I hate inoffensive stuff, right? I hate that kind of feeling like something's gone through. Today, it's sort of the Disney thing of like, oh, this has gone through a lot of test screenings to make
Yes.
it, like you said with that dialogue, sort of like that dialogue's there about God. But it's done in the exactly the kind of way where somebody, I mean, if that were in a Marvel movie today, people would say, "Oh, it's cutting edge," like it's really touching on things. And you say, "No, it is exactly as cutting edge as you can get through those test screenings."
Yes.
To make sure nobody's offended on either side, but it's still there for people to say, "Oh, isn't this brave?"
Well, it's a bit like, yeah. I mean, you had you and I have talked about the line from what I think it was WandaVision or one of those where he talks. The Vision says, what is grief but love continuing," or something like that, and everyone went mad for the line. And really, like, yeah, it's all right,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but it's not amazing dialogue. It's just an interesting line, but it's not doesn't deserve that pat on the back as much as that. And this feels the same. It's that sort of give, isn't it? You go, okay, I'm going to give a little just because it's to make people think we're giving something, but this is just that sort of like, it's a sprinkling of salt and pepper just to sort of make sure there's a little bit of flavor in it, but actually,
yeah,
it's not.
I mean, I think that you're right, and I think that like what's amazing is that line is followed up by one of the most. And there are good things about WandaVision. It starts a lot better than it ends. But ultimately, that's followed up by one of the most illogical and conventional superhero fights, as a climax that throws out anything that was artistic or good about that series. Because you've got to have that dumb payoff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in a weird way, like Fantastic Voyage it does feel like that sort of spectacle blockbuster, right? An event film. But that kind of like lack of narrative tension that you have in Fantastic Voyage has been solved by these movies. But in a way, I find that more offensive when it's solved by guys hitting each other and saying the world's at stake, except it's not, and that doesn't make sense. And suddenly they have powers that they didn't have before.
But it depends on the genre. It depends on what. But this is the thing, like with superhero films. I often, what you're getting involved in. All right, what you're going into. So if I watch like a Superman film when like Zod's like, "I'm gonna crush this Earth under my boot," and they get into a fight, and it's sort of like okay, you're gonna have that fight where if Superman loses, Zod will be the evil Superman, like he has those powers, and so the stakes are actually high. It's silly, and I know it doesn't make sense a lot of the time, and it's all a bit daft and but I'm like, okay, fine. And it's the same with a lot of those things. Like I'm accepting the on a if we view it on a curve, I'm accepting the ballpark in which I am playing in that sense, right? And so when a film is introduced, let's use Inner Space as a good example of this, right? So that's the 80s version of this, right? And you have Martin Short and Dennis Quaid playing these two sort of typical characters. It's a very 80s film. It's quite good, actually. I do quite enjoy it. But they introduce an element into that where it's not, I can't remember if it's governmental or corporate. It might be governmental. But, this thing of, if he is found and extracted, then they lose the technology. So they're being hunted for this technology. So you get this ratcheting up of tension. Some of it's very silly. But at one point, Martin Short has I think it's a German or no, Russian injected into him in another shrunken thing. And so you're going like, much like with this film, where you're going sort of like, okay, so somebody else has got that technology. So why are they after Dennis Quaid? Like, what is it what's the problem? And all this other stuff, but because you're sort of going, okay, but they're playing it sort of for laughs. It's like you say, it's designed to be a certain kind of film. I'm meeting it on its own terms in that case, because I'm enjoying other elements of it. But it has certain tensions, like it has a fight. It actually has a fight in the digestive system. You see someone digested. It has some other funny bits. and because you've got a charismatic cast, it helps. Do you know what I mean? You buy into that, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna give that, I'm gonna give it that, and I'm gonna give it that, and I'm gonna enjoy it on its terms. The problem with Fantastic Voyage is, as I say, because it's so inoffensive, like nothing sort of nothing is elevating itself. Like if it was funny, or if it was like really gory, if they did something to elevate that one element, I'd be like, I'm really enjoying those bits, so I'm going to kind of let those bits go. Do you know what I mean? So like,
Yeah, sure.
but
It's
there's
charming in some way, or right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Or looks great,
Yeah.
has some weird veneer of weird coolness to it, sort of fountain style.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Like if it's going to introduce something where I'm like, they enter the brain, and all of a sudden it was like, 2001, and they're like, it's full of stars or something. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, that would be cool, actually.
that'd be amazing. You're like, oh my god, this has got into a really psychedelic place. I'm going to let that stuff go because it's gone here. There's none of that. It's so linear and so sort of secure and safe that like that you do end up looking at bits and going like, look, that's become glaring, and there's nothing to counter it for me to. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, and it's that kind of like flatness of this film. Having said that, I mean, you were talking about like accepting these films for what they are, right?
Yeah.
And it's true that this does not have that sense of fun. And I think that certainly when you're talking about, like the Fast and the Furious or Marvel movies, I mean, they're very focused on delivering that fun for the audience, right?
Popcorn. It's a popcorn fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's designed. There's nothing wrong with that. It's designed to do that, and that's fine. And this is a movie that, in theory, should be delivering that fun, and
But
just is not.
No.
But right. You're right. It's not charming or anything.
No, but that opening sequence, the plane comes in, the professor come off, and then the cars crash, and there's flames and gunshots, and oh my god, he's in a coma. Cool. Right. Are we in like an espionage thriller? Is this going to be sort of like, is this going to be, this is 66, so okay, you're going to have a sort of like, you're going to be looking to have some
Steed and Peel kind of
follow up. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Is it going to have like an espionage bent? Is it going to be these kinds of things? Is it going to have a bit of a Bond kind of feel or anything? What's it going to have?
There's a security guy on the craft who's interrogating everybody for being a traitor, and
exactly.
Got a gun.
Yeah. You were told not to bring a gun on board, but someone's brought a gun on board. Blah 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 blah. All those kind of things we now know as cliches, but could be in this film. Like, is that what I'm going to get? Paranoia and mistrust. No, not getting that. All right. Am I going to get, like you say, a family entertainment spectacle where I'm going to get sort of, high adventure and drama with someone clinging to the side of a lung, where it could be sort of like, I don't know, something, but like you don't get that either. So I'm a little bit confused as to sort of like, what is the point of this film? Like, I get the pitch. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, we're going to shrink people down to save someone's life, blah, blah. But when you get into the film, it's like you said, it's so flat that there's nothing elevating it. And there's no like, when I think of like, what's the Lost in Space? Like the TV show, or even the
TV show, yeah.
Yeah, or any of the versions of that, and you have what was the doctor called? He's got the hammy doctor and stuff like, I'll get you.
Evil kind of.
Yeah, like, all right, am I going to get like a you got Donald Pleasance, for Christ's sake? Like this is Dr. Loomis, this is Blofeld. Get something hammy. Go do something. Do you know what I mean? And that's the problem.
I do. I mean, but I want to come back to this sort of comparison of sort of thinking of this as a spectacle or a blockbuster. You said, like, when you watch the current kind of movies, you know what to expect. I mean, that's true to a degree. But what I would say, I mean, Fantastic Voyage is way better than most of those movies. And, one of the... Oh, for sure. and one, I mean, God, it's 10 times better than, Infinity War. But seriously, and part of the reason is because it is inoffensive. Like, it doesn't say And while I'm all for go crazy, have it's full of stars when you get into the brain, but it doesn't say at the end the biggest problem is like the ship is consumed by white blood cells or whatever, and it doesn't get out of him, right? I mean, it should be growing, and I find myself thinking, like, if you're the saboteur, all you have to do is take your ring off and just leave it inside him, like
I thought about this.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, that's a bomb. Just wait until this shit goes off. But okay, so this is a plot hole, right? But at least the movie follows through on its premises. It doesn't ultimately get back to the Cold War thing. It doesn't have anything to say about anything. But a scene unfolds and it's like, we're going to go through the heart. Okay, now we go through the heart. As they're going through the heart, they don't say, we're out of time. And, we want it to be more dramatic. So today it would be more dramatic. But then in most of these blockbusters, they'd say, right, it's dramatic. We're out of time. Fortunately, I brought on the ship. I'm a magician. I haven't mentioned this previously. And I'm going to do an incantation that makes us go back 30 seconds in time. And now we're going to go through the heart again, except somehow we're going to make it this time, even though that incantation didn't speed up.
I know what you're saying.
Draft. I mean, and that's all of these movies that I object to do exactly that. Where, yes, it is dramatic if you are mentally, have an ice pick in your head.
No, I disagree with that, because I think, yes, there's certain things that get, the gimme, if you will, the sort of like, I will let that slide. I mean, again, like if I use the Fast and the Furious as a good example, like, of this, exactly what you're saying is we're in this predicament and someone will go, I've got a stick of gum that'll block a hole that, all of a sudden I can block a hole to outer space with some bubble gum or like, spearmint. I sort of get what you're saying on that front, but it doesn't shift genre. I don't think they're going to go like a sci-fi film and go, but actually I'm Doctor Strange and I'm going to do this. Like you meet it on its own terms, but at least those films in many cases are trying for something. I'm trying to think of a good example recently that's done these things. Again, I'll think of like, past, I'll go to like, disaster. This is akin to either like a travel movie or a disaster movie. And I think of like Armageddon. And Armageddon's got a lot of those things where it's sort of like, we get there and we can't drill down because the iron's too tough or there's something else. We've got to do something else and all this other stuff. I mean, even the premise of that is like it's easier to train miners to become astronauts than astronauts to become miners is ridiculous in and of itself. Yes. Yeah, I mean, Ben Affleck even confronted Michael Bay about this, or Jerry Bruckheimer about this, and he said, Ben, I'll tell you the answer to this. It's quite simple. Fuck off, go act. And he's like, they get that. That's the point. But again, what my point is, you meet it on its own terms, and you're saying that this film is 10 times better than those. I massively disagree. In the sense of, in the moment, if I'm going in and going, I know what this film is. I know that I'm going to go watch a Fast and Furious film. I know it's going to be ridiculous. I know they're going to have tanks doing wheelies or some other shit. Like, I know it's going to be stupid. The Rock's going to be jumping off an oil rig and doing something mental or something. Like, fine, I'm fine with that. Like, because I know what this is supposed to be. I'm going to meet it on this.
Everything you're saying is a straw man argument, because you're saying I know what it is. Nobody is objecting to dumb, action sequences. Nobody is objecting to The Rock flying off of buildings. I mean, if you say I know what it is going in. Yeah, of course. I mean, nobody is going to watch like Avengers and say, wait a minute, a guy can't lift those many pounds with muscles that size. I mean, that's intrinsic to the concept, right?
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, what I'm saying is, like if you spend your entire movie saying like, all right, we're gonna shrink this down, right? Here's the basic premise of the movie. Here's how the shrinking technology works. It lasts an hour, and then you're going to start growing. At the end of that, you can say, right, we're going to start growing, but that doesn't mean we automatically get back up to the full size in 1 second, right? We're going to have to get out while we're growing. Okay, that's fine. Not a problem. But if that is everything that you've set up, and then you suddenly change those rules so that it doesn't matter at all anyway, or the rules are fundamentally different, then the more drama and tension that you infuse, the more angry I become, because now you're trying to sell me on how dramatic and cool this is, when actually this is mind-bendingly stupid, and you've changed the rules. So a good example of that would be like, well, if he gets the stupid infinity gems, he's all powerful and can remake the universe at will. So what we're gonna do, right? Because he's apparently just mind-bendingly stupid. I mean, his motivation doesn't make any sense. That's fine, right? But we're gonna have a guy with a shield punch him. No, he's already got the thing. He can zap all of you away. Nobody is going to stand there and get punched when they can unmake the guy punching him with one thought, right? If that's not happening, why am I watching any of this? You cannot do this and believe that is dramatic. Something is wrong with your brain if you're entertained by that. I cannot get past that. Something like Fantastic Voyage, it is dull. It is not done. It is not going for the fun. Clearly, it fails at that. But at least it is consistent. And, it doesn't have a character say, by the way, I'm from Alpha Centauri.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. All right. So you're saying it sticks. I see what you're saying, and the Infinity War argument will come for another day.
Yeah.
But, so I appreciate what you're saying about that you consider what you consider to be changing the rules. However, the other thing I would say is, you see it's consistent. Okay, you agree it's dull, but you see it's consistent. But the premise is all right. This is a bit like this film, right? You're saying it's consistent. Okay, my premise for today is I'm going to get my car and I'm going to drive to the local supermarket and I'm going to complete this shopping list, and then I'm going to come home and put that shopping list away. All right, but I also know that there is a person working at said supermarket that is trying to stop me from buying X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when I get to the supermarket, that person just says to me, "You can't buy X, Y, and Z." I go, "Well, I'm going to." And you go, "Okay." Well, I'm going to buy these ones. And I go, "Okay, well, I'm just going to take these ones and leave." Like, come home and unpack it. That's what this film is. Like, it's literally that sort of linear. Like, and then you go, "Well, why did they want to stop you from buying X, Y, and Z?" "Oh, well, I just don't think they like me." You go, "Okay, well, why don't they like you?" "Oh, I don't really know." "Okay, well, did you talk about it with them?" "No." "Okay, did they pose any risk at all at any other point?" "No." This is what you see. It fits its premise, but it doesn't, because it tells you it's an espionage film, and it never has any espionage.
Well, I don't think it tells you it's an espionage film. I think the espionage is just there to set up. We're going to shrink and go inside somebody's body, right?
Yeah,
you're right. Like, it doesn't say. So we're having a deeper conversation here about like what is worse, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it worse to say, yeah, that guy trying to stop you from buying those grocery items is totally unmotivated. Or there's one line at the very beginning and he's never going to mention it ever again, right? Okay, that's bad. I agree, that's bad, all right? But it's not bad, right? Like capital B-A-D. It is not offensive to the concept of art. It is badly done, but it is not. It is entirely different sort of transgression to have him say, for example, well, my reason for trying to stop Scott is because I'm from the Dwarf Republic, and Scott, if he buys these things, will destroy my homeland. All right, well, can we see that Dwarf Republic? How does that work exactly? Why are we buying these things? No, never going to be explained. And we're going to spend $10 million to have like a 2-minute sequence of the Dwarf Republic being destroyed. Why is that happening? Why is Scott connected to that? Not important. That's a whole other level of bad.
Yeah,
And that's
uh,
what we get today. This is just inoffensive.
yeah, I think I can see that with some films. Again, I've seen that with, like, if anything, like I say, and I'll continue with the Fast and the Furious, because we can
In
stick with
fairness,
that.
I have not seen.
No, yeah, and I'll think of some others in a minute. But it's just because I know these, because those are offensively stupid. Like, they started. I mean, the whole franchise starts with it's about an FBI agent infiltrating car racing. That's the premise of the first film. Like, it's basically sort of Point Break.
The
but
main
with,
thing J. Edgar Hoover was focused on.
yeah, street racing, but they were stealing
Yeah.
things. But then becomes this sort of like massive sort of like blockbuster stupid event sort of spy thing, still with the same characters that were existing in the first film that were driving cars, drag racing cars in LA. And that's a shift, but that's a shift where you go, okay, it sort of escalates and it's silly. But Hobbs and Shaw, which was the offshoot, which had Jason Statham and The Rock in it, did this thing where it introduced biotechnology and made Idris Elba into a cyborg. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's really sort of upping into territory I'm not exactly comfortable with, and has stunts and stuff in it where I'm like, they're running down sides of buildings and they're doing all this other stuff. And at the end of it, like, oh yeah, like it's lunacy. At the end, they go back to Samoa or Hawaii, I think. Well, no, I think it's Samoa, and they meet the Rock's family, and they basically sort of like they basically hacker these people to death. Like there's some cool scenes and it looks fun, but it's that thing you're
Not
saying.
in the same universe, right?
No, it's where you go. Yeah. This isn't the same as this thing I was watching over here. So like it's a complete shift. And so I appreciate what you're saying there, of where they're saying these characters that you knew, that were this are now superheroes. They are now this.
Yeah.
And even especially in the case of Jason Statham, who actually starts as a villain trying to kill all the people, is now in the hero role and stuff. So it's the loon. I get what you're saying in that sense of like, do you remember that thing we told you before? Yeah, we're going to shift 100 and like we're going to take you 180 degrees and do something different because that's what's popular now. So that's what I get what you're saying on that. However, you said something there about art. I would never say that Hobbs and Shaw's art in any way, shape, or form, right? And I would say this is where we have to get into this idea of entertainment versus art, okay? And so so let's talk about, and let's use Infinity War as a benchmark for this. I was in a theater, and I know I can imagine your reaction to this. I was in a theater in that scene when Cap is on his own, Chris Evans, Captain America, and his shield's broken, but he still tightens that belt to sort of use against his broken arm, and he's ready to take on Thanos and that army that he's got in front of him, right? And I'm sat there, right? I'm sat there. There was people. The theater was packed, and all of a sudden you hear on your left, or you hear the noise, you hear the crackle coming through, and then you see. The portal's open. Let's just call it the portal scene, right? And you have Black Panther walk through with Shuri, and then you hit on your left, and Sam comes through, and then you get all the others come through, and all the other, all those characters you've seen have come through.
The fact that you can name these characters. I mean, Black Panther, outside of the color of his costume, is indistinguishable from Iron Man. Exactly the same character.
Let's not get into that, but
yeah, I mean,
but the point is in this scene, and your point being, on the other side of this, you have all these things coming through the portals, right? You get Doctor Strange, and you get the Guardians of the Galaxy, and Spider-Man comes back, and it's a big way. But when you hear that on your left, and Sam comes through, right?
Which is such an easy thing to do, right? Like on your left, right? There's the callback. Everybody knows it's coming.
Yeah. Well, totally. The cinema I was in erupted. Erupted. Wah! Right? Everyone was into it. There were like people getting proper into this scene. It was probably one of the most, played out scenes, but then like the portals all opened. And it was a massive success. At the other end of the field, in the cinema universe, is Thanos stood there, with the Infinity Gauntlet and with his big sword and all this other shit. And he's just stood there watching. And you're right, because he could just go, gone.
Right. And if he doesn't, there was never any threat to begin with. and everything they've done for this entire movie and all of these other movies was meaningless.
Well, no,
Right.
actually, no. That's no. Sorry, because he doesn't. He's not actually wearing the gauntlet at that point because it's buried under Avengers Mansion. But he does get it later on. When he gets it, and you've got them all
and
there,
he's still engaged in fisticuffs.
and he's still engaging in fisticuffs and stuff.
But
Like,
look, so you're talking about this moment that, and I'm all for. Look, I mean, I like the Transformers movies at times. They're flawed. I can admit they're flawed, and I know what I'm enjoying. I mean, and I know that this is not good, right? I know what's good and what's not in those movies, and I'm not recommending them to anybody. With some exceptions. But I know what's good and what's not there. But you're talking about this experience, and by all means, bless anybody for having that sense of fun, right? You're my buddy, okay? I'm glad that you enjoyed that. I'm glad you had that riveting moment. If I were in that theater, the level of hostility that I would feel, not my hostility toward the film. This says something about me, okay? Not that. The level of hostility that I would feel from that audience toward me. I would feel as if I am, like the average person from Alpha Centauri who landed here would have more in common with, all of us in the movie theater than I would with the rest of this movie theater. And I would just feel like, okay, my brain is so different. This is a sort of like exterminating gesture to me. I'm glad that they are, like I will never fit in. I will always believe that anybody around me is one mood shift away from literally killing me. I am just absolutely alien. There's no point in me writing anything. There's no point in me trying to have a friendship or communicating with anybody, because this is a thing that most human beings can do in their brains and can go to this place that I'm watching it already with my head in my hands, just depressed and suicidal about what I'm watching and how much money was spent on this, and not being able to understand how anyone could be entertained by it. And so for me, that is a profoundly painful, existentially threatening experience. And I'm glad that it's fun for you. I cannot get there. And obviously something's wrong with my brain. And that's of course why it's so painful for me.
But I think that's the thing. It's about what we take from this thing. And this is what I'm saying about this idea of sort of entertainment. So like you say about sort of like, it's about what you'd recommend. I'm the same. Like there are certain films I know I watch, and I think we've talked about this. Like there are films I go like, no, I love that film. It's amazing. I know it's crap, but I have a fondness for Howard the Duck. We're going to get to it in this season.
Yeah, I do too.
I have a fondness for the film, but there are still parts of that film where I'm like, oof, like this film is really bad.
Yeah.
I know that I have an emotional connection and I have an emotional reaction to that film. Same with Goonies. Like I can watch Goonies as an adult now and other films and go like, yeah, doesn't quite work in the way that it should or the way they thought it did. However, I still have a nostalgic connection to this film, and I'm bought into it, so I can still watch it in that 12-year-old, 10-year-old sense. And that's the thing, though. This is the thing. Like I'm overly emotional in some of these cases. Right, films fucking like, and we've talked about Armageddon. That first time, and again, spoilers for a film from the 90s that pretty much everyone's seen and has opinion. That time in that film when Bruce Willis gives that speech to Liv Tyler and it's got the music on and he's going to sacrifice them. We've talked about these two stupid sacrifices. And I know when we do it, like this will be a debate, but like that film gets me. Like I'm just sort of like, get choked up. I'm looking and I'm thinking to myself, going like, why am I choked up by this film? It's Bruce Willis. Like it shouldn't be doing this to me. But it's like there's a combination of like the music and the way it's sort of set, and you get like you got Ben Affleck crying on screen, and I'm just like, oh, I'm all in. It's all working. It's all sort of affecting me. And that's the thing that I need that attention. Like Apollo 18. You mentioned Apollo 18 is a very similar film to this. Like problem. But like you have performances, and there are things that just keep me going. Where I'm just like, I am engaged and I am worried. I know this is going to end well. I've seen I've literally read articles about the history of this. Like I know how this ends. but I'm engaged with this film, and I'm gonna sort of like react to it, and I have like it's my heart rate's increasing and all this other stuff. Even and going back to those other things, let's like Hobbs and Shaw. It's mental. It makes no sense. It's a ridiculous film, but there are still several chase scenes in that film where I'm like, I am engaged. My heart is racing. I'm proper into this moment. And so, although I know those things, that inconsistency for me, I still react to them and can come out the end of it and go, do you know what? That's bumped that up a star for me. Like, I know this film makes no sense. I know that sort of like at the end, I really hated that ending. Like, or I know that this whole sequence was utter garbage. And as you say, in some cases, I will sit through and go, that third of the film is offensively bad. Like the end, the finale is so ridiculously awful. But then I like this other bit, so it's still a good score. Unfortunately, the thing is, and like, so I need that. I need that sort of like tension, that ratcheting up, or like even if it's
like, would you need that like emotional connection?
I need that emotional boost. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I need that silliness. Like there were silly films, like I often think of. Do you remember the Three Musketeers from the 90s with Chris O'Donnell in and Martin Sheen and Kiefer Sutherland and right? It's a Disney film, right? And it's not the best. It's nowhere near the best telling of the Three Musketeers, right? There's the one from the 70s, I think, with something that's very good. It's got I can't remember now, but there's still something about that film because it's got like the cast it's got and the time I saw it and other things. Like even then I think like it's got good sword fights, it's got these people. I'm like, oh, it's a great film. However, categorically, I still know that there are parts of that film that are utter tripe. But it's like how I was introduced to the Three Musketeers. So then I went off and read Dumas and read the book, and I was like, "That's a big book, but I've read it." And and so when I come to this, and I'm like, "Oh, it's all consistent. It all works mostly." But at no point did my pulse race. At no point. At no
but
point.
I don't care, and I don't think that it cared whether I cared.
But it should do. But that's the point. Like, tell me if you're going to if you're going to introduce with that scene of a car chase and a crash and all that. Okay, you're telling me there's going to be some excitement in this, and then just have basically a bus ride in somebody's body for an hour. I don't know. It just
like the slow boat ride down the river Styx.
That's what it was. And like you say, it introduces so many things where it's like, we're going to go inside a body. The body is an amazing thing and it can do these dangerous things. Cool, show me. We've got a traitor on board that's going to make it harder. Show me. Do something. And it's Donald Pleasance, and you go, oh, it's Donald Pleasance. I thought it was Donald Pleasance from these 4 things that already happened. Like, at no point does it raise its own pulse or my pulse. And so it might be consistent and they might be successful, but by the end of the film, I'm like, you had Raquel Welch on this. And I'll be honest with you, I forgot you had Raquel Welch in this film because you don't know what to do.
Yeah, I hear everything that you're saying. I think that we're different people.
Yes. Yes.
I think that, first of all, if something isn't meant to be taken seriously, there are ways that you can communicate that. And not everything is meant to, it's a gradation, right? There's no such thing as just, it's a joke or it's deadly serious, right?
No.
We mentioned like Tinker Tailor, okay? That's as close as you can get to deadly serious, right? Very realistic, whatever. And then there's sort of a farce on the other end. But there are ways of communicating, like, don't take this too seriously, that would indicate to a viewer or to a reader of a narrative, we're probably gonna, do some nonsense later on. Don't get too caught up in the fact that, it's dramatic, but we're gonna change the rules on you. And that is a pretty objective analysis of, what that tone is, right? And so I would say that first of all, right? This is this movie is a relatively straight movie. It's not, it's not but so are those Marvel movies.
Mm.
Like obviously Thor Ragnarok and Waititi has a different tone. They're not all in the same register, but they're not The Dark Knight, but they're also not Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Which I quite like, and we should do someday.
Mm.
But the other thing is, like you talked about, like what is art? I in the Academy, I don't think we privilege this concept of like it's art. To me, art doesn't mean anything special. There's no art with a capital A. There is no. I mean, that's not a separate category. I mean, when a child takes a crayon to a piece of paper, that's art. Is it good art? No. Is it worth preserving? No. But it is, essentially it's a visual art. It's a flat visual art. It's in the same genre, more or less, as Picasso. It's a lot less successful, but, it is a work of art. And I think that, in the same way we talk about like what's a narrative, a work of fiction, that has a structure, right, is a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And there are rules to how narrative works. There are rules to how a farcical narrative works. And so to me, there isn't just this category of like, okay, this is an art film. This is not. This is a narrative, a serious narrative. This is not. These are gradations. And I think that, that just saying that something isn't art doesn't mean that unless it's like a total, farce, like, the comedy version of Casino Royale, which is great. And I love it. Nobody's going to watch that and say, wait a minute, this gum works like that. No, I mean, it's set its own rules, right? But all of these things set their own rules, and they tell you as the viewer or as the reader how to judge them. And when you do that, and then you pull the rug out from under people and say, well, we couldn't resolve this successfully, so we're going to, suddenly introduce, like time travel or whatever, or, this threat that we've built up doesn't actually work the way we've said, and that there's no meaning behind that. It's just, I mean, that's a problem, and it's a problem in a different way than being boring is. It's bad. And to me, the more it builds itself up, like you say, you've got to have this emotional connection. To me, the more I'm aware that it thinks it's good, right? I mean, one of the things that defines bad, like really bad taste, right, is people who think they're good. It's what makes, like, when you watch MTV reality shows and you're like, that guy is way too cocky for, obviously being somebody who, should not be cocky about anything. And then it's presented by the show in a way of like, oh, isn't this fun? Isn't he yeah, that's bad with a capital BAD, right? In that same sense, the more it's built up is like, right, isn't it awesome, on your left, isn't it awesome that we're signaling these pushing the fun buttons? When I think, when something is presenting itself as really awesome and a masterpiece and really good, and these movies do get presented that way, the more they get built up, the worse, the more offensive they are when they're really, bad. And so I think like Fantastic Voyage, I mean, nobody was going to see Fantastic Voyage saying like, it has changed the history of cinema. The Russo brothers are the best director ever. Like, I mean,
I get what you're saying on that front. I would still defend Infinity War and others. I know you and I would disagree. I know we may get to some of them, but on this front, I get what you're saying. I will concede and I will agree what you're saying about art. That you should judge someone on that gradation of what they are presenting. You couldn't compare Austin Powers and the Daniel Craig Casino Royale and say these are two spy films and therefore they should be judged the same. You're right, they're very different things. But one of the things I say is that that Fantastic Voyage presents itself, and then the thing is, I don't think it does. This is the thing. Like, its opening scene is a car crash, a fire, and a shootout, and then you have a military base where they're whipping around and they're sort of talking, and then they introduce the shrink, and I'm fine with that because that's the gimme. That's the sort of the technological gimme. But the problem is, like you say, that you've got to meet it on its own terms. All right, well, if that's the case, then its own terms is it's going to send this. Even Tinker Tailor, we're using that as an example, and I actually really enjoyed that film. I think Gary Oldman, the Gary Oldman film, is very, very good. I really quite enjoy it.
I agree.
But that film is presenting you with a complex, dry view of the spy profession in the 70s, really, I suppose. And so that's what it is. But it's still got intrigue, and it's still got moments of drama and tension, and you sort of realize, like I say, how grey some of these people are, and who's their real master, and all this other stuff, like who's pulling whose strings and all this other stuff. And I find it, even like the main character at the end, you're like, actually, was he playing this differently all along? Like, there's some great moments in that. But it's still presented as being a very straight, very sort of, I'm not going to say gritty, a very straight, very sort of complex drama.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts from that point and ends on that point. That's the way it's sort of presented. It has flashes of I won't say violence, but there's flashes of let's say in verticals of action, because you have a shootout here or whatever. But it's even those are not presented in a sort of blockbuster fashion. They're quite sort of they're very straight-laced. They're very naturalistic. Mm-hmm. But with this, they're introducing almost like at one point, like a guy comes, they park the car, he's taken into a car, they park in an entryway, like an alleyway, and the car disappears into the ground. And they have an underground base, this massive underground base, like somewhere in America. And I'm like, okay, you're talking Smersh level weird now. This is sort of like, do you know what I mean? Like you're introducing me to a Thunderbirds level.
Spectre,
you're introducing to me to a Thunderbirds level kind of thing now, right? And you're going to tell me these things shrink. Cool. That's going to be your gimme. Even if you're playing this straight, I still need something, because then it becomes just too straight. You've introduced a car chase and explosions, and someone's been injured by, as you said, a Cold War espionage. I'm then going to get a laboratory or a base hidden under a city. Cool. You are now introducing me to a certain type of film, and that is not the film that is then delivered by the rest of the film, as far as I'm concerned. That's how I see it. This is showing me things that are parodied in other films. Yes. Even Austin Powers parodies this by having the base and the little carts and stuff that go everywhere. And then it introduces a straight-laced film that could have just been a submarine film in anything else. Like it just doesn't give me it doesn't pay off the promise of the opening 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think you're right about about that tone. And it seems clear to me that opening, especially the like car chase and shooting, is so clearly of a different piece entirely, right? Yeah. I mean that's been sort of tacked on, and I think you're right that really I had forgotten about sort of the way that base is presented. It reminds me of. You mentioned Austin Powers. It reminds me a bit of You Only Live Twice, the volcano base.
Yes.
Which I quite love.
Yeah.
But you're right that there is a sort of like presentation there. But I felt like it was really that chase scene that was, discordant, and that the underground base is like, right, this is fantastic stuff, right? I mean, it's there in the title. It's the most generic title possible, yes. Right? It's like Fantastic Planet, the French movie. It's like Fantastic Voyage that tells you nothing. So I think you're right to the extent that, I mean, if we disregard that chase scene, which I think is clearly just tacked on and not meant to,
I think
really,
you're right. It may have even been filmed after Like
Yes,
everything.
by a different director. I mean,
Yeah.
it does not seem like, and,
Yeah.
and it's not even edited well. Like, it's very confusing what's happening.
Yeah.
Which is not true of the main film. The main film
that's
is
true.
very clear what's happening.
Competent, very, very competently filmed. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even that's part of how boring it is, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I think that like the base, you're right, it's more enthralling than really what we get. But really, what we are going to get is shrinking. We're going to go through the human body. We're going to say, like, all right, this is the heart. Now we're in the lungs. I mean, that is fantastic. It's like a cavern like that base. I mean, to me, that's not as discordant. I think it's just, you've got to believe this is fantastic, and it being presented to you as fantastic is enough without the drama. And it occurs to me, how different would this be with a different score?
Yeah.
Score that really ratcheted up the drama.
No, that's a very good point, actually. Because I hadn't even thought about the music. In fact, I didn't even notice the music in it, other than there's a couple of scenes. So I think you're very right. I think, maybe re-editing this slightly and adding some bits, some more jarring music, or a bit more sort of like, a bit more of an intriguing score or something would probably have a bit of an effect. But
yeah, either odd, ethereal, like Star Trek motion picture
kind
of, like, what's going on? What we're uncovering the mystery, or drama, like, action kind of, oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, just a note. Obviously, this is during the period you've had like Land of the Giants on TV. You've had all these other things, doing these things. And I'm not saying they're better by any shot. That's a TV show and stuff. But like, they play up the shrinking thing in a different way. And I think it's just I don't know. Anyway, we are running to time, and I think we've covered a lot there on not just this film, but like on general sort of like this idea of what it is to be a spectacle film.
Yeah, and I think it begs these questions because we agree it's so like competently done, but so sort of inoffensively bland and almost like allergic to the concept of drama, in this really weird way. And I think that invites all of the conversation that we've had. I feel like I don't know. I mean, I think these are both valid perspectives that we have, and it may be that I have, just my Martian brain is incapable of.
I don't know. I think more, if anything, I'm just a sap, and I just get pulled into marketing all the time. So I'm just an easy mark for these kinds of films.
I feel like I'm a sap too, but we're sap in like different ways. We use the same words to describe different things.
Gradation, one kind of sap to the other kind of sap. Final thoughts on this is, I think, one thing I'd say is it is competent. Like, the special effects are actually very, very good. The sets are good. The performances are fine. Like, it's one of those, like, I'd find a lot, we've discussed it, but the biggest problem is just how pedestrian this film is. And oddly, like you say, how much this gets referenced and stuff. And having watched it now, I'm like, yeah, it's all right. Like, it does things, but there's nothing here that I would be like, especially during the 60s, especially this part of the 60s, where I'm like, right, you just had Rosemary's Baby, and you're getting all these, other sort of like other 60s films that are coming out. Like, why is this the one that people seem to mention quite a lot? It's very bizarre to me. It doesn't stand out. It was a watch. It was competently made. It didn't raise my pulse or my heart rate in any way, shape, or form. And I'm still curious to, like, say, did they actually succeed? Did the professor get out? Is he going to be all right? Clearly not important. So
he died 5 minutes after the movie ended.
Well, the one thing I wanted to highlight, as you said about the shrinking, and this is fun, is you said about leaving a ring or just something. Take off your shoe and leave it there or something. Surely they should be completely sterile when they are being shrank. Because, like you say, it could be all kinds of things. Like, how do you know that one of them didn't have like a spider, wasn't just sat on the edge of that, on the edge of that ship or something. A fly,
Right.
for God's sake, a fly. Here you go.
Yeah.
But
To get back to the fly, right?
exactly.
The complications.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
that did sort of strike me. I was like, oh, this seems a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like did paint flake off
Yeah.
from the exterior while they're going through like these potentially going through the heart, going through all this whirlpool. I mean, was there does this have? I guess it's atomic powered, but was there any fuel ejected?
We
right?
see it. We see it has jets, so it's pushing something out. So yeah.
So what is that stuff, and what happens when that grows to? What happens? Like they're like, oh, right after this movie ended, they're like, oh, we forgot about all the radioactive material we left inside him. It's now at full size.
We fixed his brain, but we appear to have given him blood cancer. So, and we didn't realize, but actually the ship was covered in lead paint as well. And he's now got 3 months to live.
Tell us the secret fast, because your body is riddled with tumors that we put there.
Yeah. So yes, it could be an issue. Anyway, Julian, from you, what are your final thoughts?
Oh no, I mean I've said more than enough.
Yeah.
I've been quite passionate. It's not. I agree with you. It's a wonderful point. Like how we agree on this movie essentially, and how did this become that influential? It's sort of staggering.
Yeah, we've had some interesting ones, and say we're at episode sort of, what is it, 6? We're into sort of the season now, so we've had some interesting ones.
6 episodes in.
Yeah, so we've had some interesting ones. So we've got some other stuff coming up. So we've got, we've done the 60s now. We're getting into the 70s next. We've got THX 1138, is it?
Mm-hmm. That's next.
So a George Lucas
Run.
Yeah, pre-Star Wars George Lucas, and then Jenny Agutter as well in Logan's Run. That's all I need to know for Logan's Run. Jenny Agutter in that film.
Like Raquel Welch is all you need to know about Fantastic Voyage.
Well, you would do if she was doing the Barbarella thing, but like she's not.
No, I know. And I do think of her that way because she's most known for that 10 million BC.
Yeah. Completely bizarre to cast her in this. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I shall leave it there. We've had quite a debate on this about these kinds of films. What are your thoughts about sort of spectacle films and Fantastic Voyage? Are we completely wrong? Have we misinterpreted this film and you feel it is a milestone in sci-fi cinema and should be represented differently? Let us know. Come find out. Find us on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. And talk to us. We're really curious as to what you want to know. Or leave us a review. Go to your podcast catcher, wherever you are. Leave a review and let us know what you think of this episode and the entire series. And if you're new to this, just want to let us drop it in because we are 6 episodes into season 4. And you found an episode. This is season 4. We've got so much of a backlog, and we've also got a load of bonus episodes. We've covered Red Dwarf. We've covered Westworld, and we've recently covered. God Almighty, what did we cover in the last bonus?
Twilight Zone.
Yeah. And now we're introducing the Twilight Zone.
Doctor
as well.
Who.
Doctor Who is what we cover. Thank you. Classic Doctor Who. And now we're covering the Twilight Zone. And between these episodes, these main feed episodes, we're releasing our bite-sized trekking through the Twilight Zone, where Julian and I talk about an episode of the classic Rod Serling Twilight Zone, starting with season 1 and working through. But if waiting is too much for you, if you want the exclusives, go check out our Patreon, www.patreon.com/20cg media. That's CG media. Link down below. There's 2 seasons on there on our Patreon. It's sort of like, pretty much like 60 something episodes of Twilight Zone. That's just going through and every single episode for the first 2 seasons. And we're still going. We've got season 3 to start and we'll be carrying on. So
plus bonus interviews, 30-minute thoughts that you record. We've got a couple of Doctor Who bonus episodes on there.
We did, yeah.
And we really appreciate your help, and we know the times are tough, and anything you can spare, it's not a lot of money. We try to keep it affordable, but we really appreciate it, and anything you can do to spread the word or sign up for the Patreon. I mean, we really want to keep this going.
We do, yeah. So help us keep the lights on in the space station. Really helps us. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a fantastic discussion. And Julian, thank you as always. It's been a treat to talk about cinema and Fantastic Voyage.
Thank you. I'm going to go get miniaturized.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and we shall talk to you in the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.